So, came across an interesting story, and it actually plays into something that I've talked about before on this show. I do not believe that we're the first intelligent species on this planet. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in Lemuria or Atlantis. I'm not saying I don't really believe in that stuff either. But I don't believe in like super advanced civilizations with like UFOs and laser guns and ancient nuclear wars and all that stuff. But the scale of the planet and the timeline of the planet is so vast. It is so vast. I don't believe that we're the first intelligent species on this planet. I think that when we're talking about scales of 4 billion years, other species had evolved to a level where they could start working with tools, maybe building little towns, maybe even getting to an industrialized size as us, and then getting wiped out. And here's the thing. You go, well, Jason, wouldn't we find buildings? If right now we disappeared and we jump ahead 1 million years, 5 million years, there will not be one trace of us on this planet at all. There will be no buildings. There would be nothing. You may find a leg bone deep in a tar pit somewhere. The thing with fossils, they're extremely rare. They're extremely rare. You need to have it in the exact right conditions in the exact right time period for you to be able to find a fossil, and that's why they have to make assumptions. If you find a leg bone in a field, because that's so rare, you go, well, there's probably like 5,000 people here. To find this one bone, it's not like one guy was walking across a field, died, and became a fossil. They can extrapolate. They have to go, well, if there's one fossil here, there must have been 10,000 people here. So, I'm not saying that they were all humanoid, and I'm not saying they all advanced to our level. There could have been a species of reptilians, or a species of muskrat, or a species of bird, or whatever, that got to the point where they're building tools, maybe building little houses, maybe like having little crow courts, and they're like, no, you are going to hang for taking all that bird seed, and all that stuff. And then they just get wiped out. And new species have to evolve to fill in that void. Whether it is some sort of natural catastrophe, whether it's some sort of meteorite strike, maybe it's some sort of war or disease, I don't know. Could be all of them. But I don't think we're the only intelligent species that have existed on this planet. So I kind of found an article, a reputable article, that kind of backs my argument up. However, to be fair, the article says, I don't believe anyone was here before we were. The article is very clear on that. The article is a thought experiment, but it's a fascinating one. And the article does state that if a civilization existed in the past 100,000 years, we would see proof of it. But if we go back hundreds of thousands or millions of years, there wouldn't be any proof of it, which was always my assertion. What's interesting is, so their article, they're talking about climate change and aliens, which is funny because that's something we covered early on in the show. And I think we kind of have a tendency to take human follies and put them on other races and other species. But what's interesting is they are stating that if there was an industrialized society to the human level 1 million years ago, there would be no structures, no books, no bones, nothing proving that they were here except for one thing. We would be able to tell if there was a industrialized society on our level 1 million years ago. And it's interesting. It would be in the soil. Not the bones, but we could tell that the soil was treated for massive farming. There would be like nitrates in the soil that don't occur naturally. That's the article's stance, is basically if they had massive farming, because right now we're in the Anthropocene, which is the age of man. And we're so rapidly changing the landscape. We're having such a massive effect on our landscape. Like, you have the Jurassic era and the Triassic era. This is the Anthropocene era. This because we're actually being able to modify the Earth to fit our needs. And they're saying there was a species at our level, they would have also have done that. And I think that's a really interesting point, and I totally get where they're coming from. And I'm not going to argue with that. Well, actually, I am going to kind of argue with that because, one, it assumes that what we see in the soil, what we consider natural, isn't what they did in the past. 2, it would also assume that they would farm in the same way or even farm the same things. If a carnivorous species evolved to our level, would they have needs for crops at all? I guess to feed animals to eat them, but I also will argue down. Maybe they wouldn't be at our level, like industrialized wise, but they could have been at a Bronze Age level. or an Iron Age level and got wiped out. And again, we're talking about such long time spans, billions of years, that you could have a species evolve and disappear every million years and you would never know it. Ever know it. I find that fascinating. People talk, the seas are completely unexplored. We know more about space than seas. We know more about the oceans than we know about the history of life before us. We can find bones and we can say, well, the environment was probably like this based on this type of animal. But our records only go back so far. We don't know about what's under the water. We don't even know what's going on the land. And here's an interesting article that plays into this whole thing. So back in May, there was this article in National Geographic. The first article was from The Atlantic. So these aren't fringe websites, which I always enjoy that because I like to talk about this stuff and have mainstream, here I'm talking about mainstream media again, but I like to have reputable sources. I can go to Creepy Weird Daily and find this article, but you get a different level of satisfaction, I'd say, by finding this in thought-provoking mainstream magazines. So National Geographic recently had this article. So in the Philippines, they found a leg bone recently that was 67,000 years old. And they're like, okay, again, with the fossils, they can go, well, it wasn't just one guy in the Philippines. It wasn't Castaway or anything. There's obviously a bunch of people here. To get this one leg bone, you would need to have a big population, 1,000 people or whatever, over a period of time. So they're like, okay, so we can say that in about 67,000 years ago, either people came from the mainland to the Philippines and settled here, or there was some sort of hominid offshoot. And even they were like, man, we didn't think there was anyone here 67,000 years ago. That's quite a ways back. These little set of islands and all this choppy water. It's crazy people got here. Well, recently they found the bones of an extinct rhinoceros, and they're like, and they dated these bones at between 650,000 and 700,000 years old. So completely predates the leg bone. They find this extinct rhinoceros in the Philippines, and they're like, oh, these bones are like 700,000 years old. This is like super cool that we found these old bones. They started looking at them, and the ribs were broken. And they're like, well, that's kind of interesting. It kind of looks like they were broken on purpose. Wasn't it someone trying to get the marrow out? And no, people weren't around back then, but maybe it was an animal. Then they were looking more at the bones, and they saw where somebody took a stone and was sawing at the rib cage to get the meat off. And the rib cage and the leg bones, someone was sawing at it to get the meat off. So at this point, the scientists are saying that is completely unexpected. That means that 600,000 years before this leg bone existed, there was someone here with the tool cutting meat off a rhinoceros that's extinct. And the article just kind of ends with, well, I don't know. You can almost see the scientists shrugging at the end of the article. There should just be like an artist rendition of 3 scientists shrugging their shoulders because they don't know. We don't know about our own history. There's all sorts of offshoots. They found those like hobbits in the Philippines as well. I don't know if they got permission from Tolkien to use the word hobbits, but we have like Neanderthals and all this stuff. It's just amazing to think that we don't know our own history. We don't have the answers to those mysteries. So the idea that something existed before us and before them and before them and before them, why not? It's definitely possible. The only reason why scientists don't believe that is because they don't have proof. And fair enough, because then they would just be going, oh yeah, lizard people ruled the world, and then along came the giant kangaroo people. And I get it, that's all speculative. So they're not going to say that, but we don't know. We don't know. Our knowledge of this planet and the knowledge of our race and the history of living things on this planet is so small, it's fantastic. And I love that. I love mysteries. Knowing everything, I think, would be boring. I want to learn the stuff. I want to watch these mysteries progress. If I had a book and I could just flip open and find the answer to every single question ever, that'd be so boring. Give me the mystery. Give me the puzzle. Give me the clues. And I'll learn it with you. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff. I'm sure we're going to talk about this more because I find these ideas very, very fascinating. I will say a quick note too. I talk about like reptilians I don't believe in reptilian aliens and stuff like that. I do think it's interesting, though, that almost every major religion, every really religion in general across the globe, they have snakes in their mythology. They're either good or bad. And I did read, and I tried to figure that out, and I read something saying that in ancient times, the way the snake eyes looked like they knew everything. They were considered wise. So that may be why, but I also think it's interesting that always plays in. But we have another episode to talk about that. Spoiler alert, I do not believe in shape-shifting reptilian aliens. I've talked about that 100 times, but... That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.